Okay.
Transfer started.
All right, so it's
Okay.
Monday, September 19th, 2022. We're calling the meeting of the Vermont Community Broadband Board to order at 12:18 after a little bit of Teams drama. We have all board members present, staff. We have Christine, we have Rob. Do we have Stan?
I'm here, yes.
Okay, we have Stan. Do we have Alyssa?
Yes.
Okay, that's staff roll call. Is there anybody I'm missing?
Nope.
Okay. First order of business is approval of the agenda. I'm going to move that we put a motion on the floor for approval of agenda with one change, and the change is to add a executive session after item 3, which would be for Vermont Community Broadband Board members only. Do I have a second? Okay, Holly gave a second. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, the ayes have it. Agenda is approved as discussed with the change, with the agenda change. First item up for business is approval of the September 6th board meeting minutes. I was not in attendance, and Holly, I think, was not in attendance either. So we'll ask for one of the other 3 to move and second.
I can move it.
Okay, Dan. All right.
Second.
Dan moved. We have a second. Is there any discussion of the minutes from September 6th?
We have, I think, last note, public comment. I think Eric expressed his encouragement that the board, there's a typo at the end.
Yeah, I was going to say, I noticed that mistake and I was going to change the language to read. Eric Hatch commented that Southern Vermont had a debrief and is very excited and appreciative of all the work and support provided from the board and VCBB staff to get to this milestone for their CUD.
Okay, with that change, is there any other changes? With that change, I'll ask the 3 that were in attendance to vote aye. Any of those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Abstentions? Patty Richards is an abstention. And Holly, you'll be an abstention? 2 abstentions. Okay, minutes carry with that amendment. All right, first item up for our review is Champlain Telecom. Christine, will you tee this up for us?
Sure. We've got Waitsfield Champlain Valley Telecom is serving, as you can remember, as you may recall from the original Maple grant, they were covering a part of their territory was covered by Maple, and they delegated the other part of that territory to Waitsfield Champlain Valley Telecom. Waitsfield Champlain Valley Telecom, for their section of the CUD, is coming for asking for a $9,104,486 grant to cover 2,655 passings. That amounts to about a grant cost of $33,430 per passing. And I always refer to this grant cost because that's really what we're funding here. The average grant cost for the state is about $5,100 a passing, $5,156. So this is well below the average for the state, and it's below the original. When Maple came in originally, it was $48.55 per passing for their area. So this is, this is well below the state average. So in other words, they're doing it at a price that's far more economical than average, which is, and they have a universal service plan, met all the requirements we have of our checklist. So we recommend the board approve this grant application. And at this point, I will turn it over to Maple Broadband to do their presentations and take any questions.
Okay, thanks, Christine. Give me a moment here and we'll get up a slide deck. So the approach we're taking here is that I'm going to start out with a few slides about Maple Broadband and our relationship with Waitsfield and Champlain Valley Telecom, and I'm going to be handing it off to Roger Nishi for the remainder of the presentation. Okay. In complement to what Christine had pointed out, you can see the map on the right-hand side. We're kind of an unusual configuration of towns in Addison County. The areas covered in gray depict Waitsfield and Champlain Valley Telecom's ILEC territory. And then those white areas are the responsibility of Maple Broadband. And we thank the VCBB for granting us $8.6 million worth of construction funds to begin our construction. And we currently expect to begin construction later this month. Some of these numbers are probably going to need to be updated. In particular, the total cost down at the bottom of the slide. We just updated the estimated total cost for construction in the Maple Broadband territory, exclusive of WCVT's territory. As some of you may be aware, Roger Nishi he's on vacation, but he's still doing whatever he can to help support WCVT's application. So I can't say conclusively that $16.6 million number is current. And I would ask Roger at his convenience to work with staff to ensure that that's a valid representation, but the balance of this is fairly accurate. The message I want to communicate here on this slide is kind of, it was a selfish approach that we took, but it's also going to result in some resiliency on the part of both Maple Broadband and WCVT. We have selected over the course of our design development process to deploy the same suite of materials and platform that is deployed by WCVT. And that includes the construction of the fiber cable as well as the strand counts. So as those of you who are dealing in this business for a long time know that there's a broad variety of strand counts available in fiber cable, from 12 fiber up to like 288 in increments of 12 or 24. And in order to ensure compatibility, optimum compatibility with WCVT's approach, we're using the same 3 strand counts for our deployment as WCVT utilizes. So what this all translates to is an attempt to address, to some degree, concerns expressed by the staff regarding supply chain issues. No, I can't speak to what WCVT is doing direct as it relates to this. I can tell you that we've already agreed that at such times as Maple Broadband is in need of materials that we've ordered but have not yet received, and the opposite occurs, we will lend each other materials as appropriate. So we're lending a degree of resiliency to our shared operation. Part of our network management agreement includes a handful of key performance indicators that are listed here. So we've actually kind of borrowed from PUC guidelines for some of these first handful of bullets. And then the bottom 2 bullets we've adapted as appropriate, including network uptime, where our driver is everyone's driver is 5 nines, but we're in the 4 nines down to maybe 9997 in our agreement. I believe it might be 8, but it's in that neighborhood regardless. And there's accountability in all of those indices in terms of how actions will be taken if WCVT fails to meet those thresholds.
Steve, I'll add on that slide that I know there was discussion on some of the other approvals about surveys and the accountability and net promoter scores. And after each and every one of our installs or interactions with the customer, we do a follow-up call with that customer and make sure that they're satisfied, and we take all their verbatim comments from those. In addition, to that, I think on a quarterly basis, we use a third party survey company to pick another 100 customers at random to get their verbatims and their feelings on us, and we share that with the whole company, and we'll share that with Steve. And then finally, we do also do an annual survey, and in that, our net promoter score was depends on how you add it together, but it was 86%. And if we add in a certain another set of customers, it's up to 93%. So it's very high, and we've been able to keep our customers happy over the long haul. In addition to that, there was also some mention of testing, and we will be doing network testing of our network to ensure that all customers meet the FCC standards in terms of uptime, latency, and speeds. You can continue, Steve. Thank you.
You bet. Thank you, Roger. All right, so we have vastly benefited from the services provided without any reservations by Wheatsville Champlain Valley Telecom. They've helped us as we started up our operation. They provided training on the affordable connectivity program that we'll be taking advantage of when the time arises. They have, without reservation, warehoused on our behalf construction materials, and they've also managed the receipt and distribution of those materials. So they're lifting a lot of the burden associated with this, our startup months, by taking the actions that they've taken. They've also helped us with network design. And then I think as some indication of their ownership sense about our network, they also will be building out our network hubs on our behalf. So the way this works is, just to make clear, we've clearly expressed in our network management agreement that and asserted our ownership of our materials and the infrastructure, and we also make decisions as it relates to pricing and whatnot. But the labor going into actually construction of the hub, not design of the hub per se, but the actual construction of the hub, that's a task that WCBT is taking on. And the benefit to that, as you can imagine, is that they're taking an ownership of the network that they're ultimately managing on our behalf once we go live. So I think it lends to some indication of their investment in our success. In terms of transparency, we do have regular Maple Broadband business planning meetings, including the one that the key folks at Maple Broadband and Roger had this morning, despite the fact that he's away on vacation. We also receive regular presentations to our governing board. Roger just delivered a presentation regarding his grant application that we're talking about today to our governing board, answered all the questions, and also helped provide some high-level design information to any of the board members that expressed interest. And then finally, there's some construction reporting that we have implemented with the agreement on the part of Roger. Just a moment here. There it is. So actually, I really like this slide. This is actually a Word document, and what I like about it is, first of all, the fact that the first year of operation is dramatically different between the two. When we issued this report to our governing board on July 1, we still said tentatively that we're going to begin not launching our network this year, and that is still our plan, though we can't report as of today that that's happened. Again, that's the start date for the construction is later this month. We show here as 0 employees. I'm going to put a plug in here to inform you that in the same governing board meeting that Roger delivered his report on WCBT's activities, we also voted to hire Ellie DeVilliers as our executive director. So that number is going to go up from 0 to 1 next time we issue our report at the end of the year. And so what you can see as a result is, at least for what happened in the first 6 months of this year, is As you're well aware, Maple Broadband has not yet constructed any miles of network or connected any subscribers. We're still just days away from beating that effort. And then WCBT's experienced the same challenge. As some of you may recall, that we worked with WCBT to apply for an NTIA grant. If they had been awarded that grant, they'd be putting numbers up on the board for the first half of this year. But as you are all aware, this has not happened. So I think we'll probably see a different presentation there at the end of this year. That's all I have for the presentation. Roger, you have the floor.
So even though we haven't received any grant funding this year, that hasn't kept us from doing any work. We've actually installed 80 locations in the Maple Broadband towns to date, and we have approximately another 120 to 130 in Starksboro as part of the Big Hollow job. So like I said, even though we haven't received the grant funding yet, that hasn't stopped our construction, because we do know we just need to keep installing customer locations. Now, I shared with the Maple Broadband board that 80 or 200 in total doesn't seem like a whole lot. We focused a lot in the non-CUD area this past year, and we're above 800 to 900 now total company-wise that we've done installs with. And the main reason we haven't focused we focused on the other side is that once we do get the grant funding for the Maple Broadband area, we will hit it really hard, and our plans are to install more than 2,000 customers over the next 2 years in the towns of Addison, or the exchanges of Addison, Panton, Weybridge, and Bridport. Steve, you can move on. So like I said, right now we're focusing on the engineering of the Addison, Panton, Bridport, and Weybridge areas, and we're moving along quite well. And in fact, one of the high points of this, just before the meeting that we had with the Maple Broadband board, was that we were meeting with GMP and working on our connection point to bring all the customers that Maple's building to in their area into the Wadesfield's network, so we can haul them all the way to New York and Boston, and they can get their bandwidth. Next slide, Steve. So late this year, we're going to get started in Addison. And as I said earlier, as various splitter cabinets come on board, we'll start adding customers in those areas, and we'll pass 2,700 homes in those exchanges, and we're going to install to 2,300 of them. While all this is also going on in terms of the networks, next slide, Steve. We're also, like as Steve mentioned, we're meeting with Steve almost on a regular basis, and we talk to him daily. If he's not talking to me, he's talking to our network team, or even Ellie and others are talking to our marketing folks. But we've been working on the housing, the customer acquisition, and actually we're implementing a crowdsourced tool now, so we can gauge customers' interest in areas as we roll those areas out. That's what we call crowd fiber. And we're doing all the background information, which you don't see, taking care of the banking information, accounting, making sure that DigSafe contracts are set up. So there's all this, the work behind the scenes that we've been heavily involved with the Maple Broadband team, and making sure that once the customers are added to the network, we're running and we're going at full speed. And with that really concludes our presentation. We thank you for the time today, and we look forward to hearing from your response to what we've presented.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's turn it open. Let's open it up to questions. I see that Laura has her hand up. Laura, you're first.
Great, thank you. I have questions for Steve and I think it's just, well, no, and Roger. So Steve, I noted the last slide that you spoke to, and I want to make sure I understood it correctly. appears to me is that working with Maple CUD, Waitsfield Champlain will be, as the operator of the Maple CUD, will be more than doubling the number of addresses it's servicing between its existing lines and the addition of Maple. Is that, did I read that correctly or not read that correctly?
Yeah, that's a fair representation. I think what we're looking at in the table that I showed you, the one that we distributed semi-annually, is more a report on progress on a semi-annual basis in terms of connecting subscribers. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but
It does.
hopefully it does.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure I was understanding, you know, just generally what was happening with Maple or with Waitsfield Champlain through their partnership with the CUD. The next question I have is for Roger. Roger, can you tell me how many times Waitsfield Champlain Telecom has had a service quality investigation opened up by the PUC against it since 1904?
We have never had a service quality investigation, at least in my time that I've been in Waitsfield and Champlain Valley Telecom, which has been the past 28 years. We do get the normal inquiries from the Department of Public Service when customers call in with their concerns, but never a full-blown investigation.
Okay, so, and you have been operating a copper network and are now switching over to fiber, right? Okay.
Yes.
Another question for you, Roger. What can you help me understand what level of increased accountability a Maple CUD customer has from your regular customer?
So once Maple Broadband, well, we have our current customers today, the 15,000 or so broadband customers and voice customers that we have today, and they will remain customers that we'll keep a priority on. And as we add Maple customers, they're going to receive the same care and service that we bring to our current Waitsfield and Champlain Valley customers. And that's what we're going to measure in what Steve shared previously. And for us, looking out at our overall customer base, as we add customers from NEK and also CV fiber, it's all about maintaining the level of service we have today, making sure that our standards are up to date and that we get the installs done on time, and that we bring the quality of service that we've come to expect and that we know that all of our partners expect. Okay.
I'm not sure that I'm being clear in my question, and Steve, I'll add you in here for you all. So Act 71 not only wants us to reach every address, it also wants us to have public accountability in that to support community efforts, which we're doing here with the CUD. And I see measures of additional accountability that are happening here, but I wanted to hear from Roger if he saw them as any different from what he has with his current customers. And I guess I'll ask Steve, you mentioned that you've hired an executive director.
Yes.
And if you can just speak to the sustainability of your CUD and that executive director, how will those that position and that community representation kind of looking at this public funding that's going in continue? How will that be maintained?
So I think the best indication is the fact that there is some accountability on the part of WCVT as it relates to our needs. So as envisioned by Act 71, we represent 20 Addison County towns, some of which are served by WCVT and some which are not. And each Maple Broadband member town has a delegate, and they attend our monthly governing board meetings. And it is not unusual that we entertain questions during those meetings about when, for example, when's WCVT going to build in my town? And that's not the only kind of question. There's some more technical questions. There's fairly broad range of items that they need. And then one of our functions is to funnel those issues and concerns through to WCBT, which we do on our weekly meetings with senior management of WCBT. And then that same process delivers responses, which we report back to our governing board on. The part that I think is hard for me to expand on beyond that is my sense of what WCBT does with their direct subscribers that they currently are servicing. I'm aware that they have regular newsletters where they report updates and information to their subscribers as it relates to concerns and whatnot. Every indication that we have is that WCBT is incredibly responsive. The comment that I made early on in our operation was that when we met with the Bristol Select Board and they learned of our relationship, our network management agreement with WCBT, one of the select board members says, whatever you do, don't screw up what's going on with WCBT. They're doing a great job. So I kind of took that as an indication of the fact that that's why we wanted to develop a relationship with them in the first place. They've got an excellent reputation in the community. So I imagine that WCBT's transparency and accountability to their subscribers is consistent with our experience.
Steve, thank you. I want to, that works in a competitive market, which of course a lot of the funding that we're doing are for non-competitive markets. But I wanted to come back to my question about the CUD's sustainability, noting that you've hired an executive director. How does your CUD, can you just talk a little bit about how your CUD will continue to exist going forward? Will you be generating revenue as part of this build out that will allow you to continue providing a public face here?
Well, our mandate is, you're well aware of our mandate. We need to deliver. We want to ensure that every subscriber, every address in our member towns have access to fiber broadband service. And so what I've represented in recent presentations to some of our member towns is that that we're going to look different this first few years than we do 10 years from now, in that in these early years, we're going to be focused strongly on deploying fiber broadband service to our subscribers, generating revenue. Our overall objective here at a very high level is that we're going to take leverage to the degree possible grant funds to do our construction and generate a revenue flow for that. And then the high level thinking here is that at some point when we've benefited from that grant money, we will move to the municipal bond market, and areas that we bypassed as a response to incidental overbuild concerns, we'll return to them and we'll pass everyone. So 10 years from now, I think we're going to be done. There may be a few incidental pockets that need attention, but for all intents and purposes, I think by that time we're going to be done. We're still the custodian of the CUD services, and so while we might have employees 3 years into the process or 5 years into the process, we may only have a hand of quote unquote custodians that manage the borrowings and manage the accountability that we seek from WCBT.
In 10 years. So there's some means, so the CUD is envisioned to exist in 10 years.
From my perspective, I don't see it changing ever, because ultimately, at some point, we're going to extinguish the debt. We'll pay off all the debt, and then we'll be able to lower subscription rates for our subscribers. And then perhaps at that point, whenever that happens, we'll leave it in the hands of the VCBB and the legislator as to what to do about this successful effort.
No.
If not, we'll be in operation one way or the other until we're told to not be in operation.
Okay. Patty, I just have one more question. And Steve, let's say that Waitsfield, Champlain, is sold to some hedge fund or investment fund, and all of a sudden there's a lot of problems. What does the CUD do?
Well, we have terms of our network management agreement that address that eventuality. The way we're building our network, despite the fact that that map of our network shows what I refer to as 2 islands of CUD presence, we're going to, part of our build ensures that those 2 islands are interconnected via infrastructure that's not provided by WCBT. We want to own the totality of our subscribers in a single discrete network, at which point we'll have the opportunity to move on to seek another operator. And I don't see that as being a significant issue. As I recall, the terms of our network management agreement provide sufficient time for any kind of a transfer of responsibility from WCBT to others.
Thank you.
Okay, next hand up was Holly. Holly, you're up.
Thanks, Patty. Roger, every question I'm going to ask you now is just a matter of objective consistency, not a reflection on the high praise that WCBT receives for its services and its community participation. So I saw in the staff review that the rate charge is $103 for 100 megabytes square. Would you explain what the base rate is and whether it's the same for Maple as for WCBT customers?
I do not know the Maple rates right now. They are still working on their rates as part of their business model. I know that we are constantly reviewing our rates, and we realize that we want to condense some packages and bring that rate down, because your concern is probably that it's over $100, and we are looking at that right now.
Okay, you know me, I love affordability. Steve wanted to make a comment. May I let him jump in?
Yes, yeah, we are not in lockstep with WCBT's rates. Our decisions about rate setting relate to ensuring that we have a satisfactory take rate, and so we can meet our overall business objectives.
Well, that might shed light on this, the answer to this question. And Roger, this is oriented towards you. Here we have Maple, who has made a separate application. We have other CUDs who've made applications with a commercial provider, whether an incumbent or not, an eligible provider or not. Why is this system not part of the Maple system and part of your operating agreement? Why do you need it to be private infrastructure?
So it's something to where, as part of federal universal service funding and in the operations of our service area, all those customers are counted as part of the funding that we receive at the federal level. So say if Maple were to come in and we were to overbuild us and say they were separate from us, as those customers went away, that universal service funding could be reduced at the federal level. Now it's all in a state of flux now, but it's important for us to maintain our current footprint and customers to at least keep the funding as it comes in today at those levels. I can't speak to the future on that, but that's the main intent, and it makes for a system in which we're not competing for the same customers in an area that is just extremely difficult to serve and high cost in nature.
And so, thank you for putting that on the record. I see that as this is inherent in the transition of copper line customers to fiber customers, because they are USF funded residences or locations. Okay, so I'm just trying to reconcile in this statement in staff summary, it suggested that 1,100 of the addresses, 1,100 of the 2,700 addresses passed are not eligible. And can you identify the why, like how would they not be eligible if they're sitting there on a copper line?
So there are copper lines and they have short enough loop distance today to where they can get speeds of greater than 25 or 3. Now, I think we can include some of them as incidental, but we haven't done so in this because we do realize that our overall build is going to be much, much more than the over amount of funding we're requesting. But it really comes down to these are customers today that are either close enough to our OLTs, or they can be bonded to speeds greater than 25 over 3.
Okay. So just 2 more questions, I think, or question and comment. While I appreciate that there is tremendous transparency between Maple and WCBT, and that there's a lot of conversation back and forth about performance, I don't have a copy of your agreement. I haven't read it, and I don't know what the enforcement standard is for this contract or what the penalty provisions would look like. And I don't know what it looks like if you should decide to part ways. Is there any, can you give us, without going in, do you need to go into executive session to discuss those matters? You're on mute, Roger.
I will go ahead and answer that. And if Steve has anything to add, he can add that. I don't think we need to go into executive session. It's the main gist of our agreement is we need to build at the same pace or at a quicker pace in Maple. And that is something that as an incumbent provider, when we get the funding, we are going to ensure that we continue to build at the pace that meets their needs. So there is no way we're ever going to have to question, I think, or come to question why things aren't being done. As over 120-year operating company in the state, we've evolved our network over and over and over. And in fact, if we want to talk DSL, there's been so many different flavors of DSL to keep everyone's speeds at least sufficient. You'll see how we've continued to invest in our network. So while I'm not naming any of the penalties or any of the remedies, I don't foresee that ever coming into play.
Steve, did you want to make any comment before I comment?
Well, as it relates to penalties per se, we basically lifted some PUC tariff language regarding some of those accountability items that you'll find in there. And we did not create any higher thresholds of accountability in those areas. The PUC expected demonstrated efforts to improve if and when those thresholds are WCBT fails to deliver at those thresholds. So like the PUC expects from WCBT, we're basically just saying we have the same expectation, and we do that to the degree we're able, which is basically PUC is looking pretty much at just voice. So what we did when we negotiated our network management agreement with WCBT is we took a look at the fact that Maple Broadband is more about internet than they are about voice as far as what we expect to be deploying to our subscribers. And so we added some criteria that addressed that using the same overall accountability structure that had been created by the PUC.
I guess I'm not aware of that accountability structure per se, and since if the PUC is talking to a wireline telephone provider, voice telephone provider, they are a regulated service, and the PUC can regulate them. And if they're talking to a fiber provider, a broadband provider. They can't. So I have a hard time tracking with you on whether or not that actually creates enforceability. So here's where I come out. It pains me to have to say this, but we put CCI through the ringer in our last review based on their reputation and their past performance. And what we came up with is that we had to have performance criteria that my colleagues passed in the last meeting, passed as in accepted as adequate performance criteria and enforceability. And that was based on the elevated standard was based on reputation and past performance. I'm just a little uncomfortable here not creating some criteria in this agreement and handing a stellar, admittedly stellar provider this level of public funding without knowing what the performance criteria are and what the enforceability of those performance criteria would be and who holds that enforcement opportunity. It cannot be the VCBB, so it can't just be in the grant. And when you combine that level of support with $103 a month service statement, what the rate would be, I get pretty uncomfortable. And so I'd be inclined not to vote yes on this only for those reasons. And if it is the case that you are so beautifully aligned, I can appreciate why this grant is going for a privately held commercial network. And I'm not in favor of that. I can support that, but it should be no problem to put performance criteria in the agreement where you're so beautifully aligned. So kind of the sleeves off your vest idea, no problem, you can have them. That's my comment. Thank you very, very much for your efforts.
In follow up to that, this is Patty. Hi, Roger and Steve. Would you consider some standards similar to what was put in place, what was voted on for Southern Vermont CUD and CCI?
I really can't give you an honest answer on that, Patty. I've not really spent time on that, so I really don't know.
In reviewing what was presented and what I saw, I mean those are the types of things that we do on a regular basis. I mean, meetings with the CUD, if there are an outage, and this is a one where we may not always give a reduction or a credit to the customer, because when you take an hour outage and you divide it over a whole month of 24 hours a day, when you offer up a credit of $2.10 or even less than that, customers are offended, and so we normally don't do that. But I will say there's nothing on there that is insurmountable and that I find objectionable.
Okay, I appreciate that. And one of the things that we are trying to sort through is if we do it for one, shouldn't we do it for all? If we're creating a standard of consumer protection provisions, there should be some sort of thinking that all the CUDs would fall under that same model. At least that's in my head. Laura, you had your hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Patty. I think that would be fantastic. But just to be clear, with CCI, the performance standards that they're being held, I mean, they are barely being held to a performance standard. Barely, which is why I voted no. And in this case, the CUD, there's two things that are different in my mind in this case. One is we do not have a record of of the state having to be involved with the operator for poor performance, consumer protection, number one. And number two, there's a plan for this CUD to continue into the future to maintain that connection and that accountability. And that, to me, is a significant difference between this and the application with CCI. The CCI performance measure that they're being held to, barely. And I'm not surprised to hear Roger say, of course, we could do that.
I mean, if it's a barely hurdle, then that should be easy to rise to the occasion and say, yep, we'll do it. If it really truly is a barely hurdle. So just, I know you haven't had time to review necessarily the details and the specifics, but that's important to me. And the other thing I want to note is this is not the CUD applying, the way I read this in our packet, that it's actually Waitsfield Champlain Valley applying. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah, that's correct. I could just insert myself here. When we originally discussed WCBT's application for funds to build in our territory, the general indication we received at the time was that it was our responsibility to submit this application. And we know from experience that it is to preparing a grant application, be it for ourselves or for someone else, is a huge undertaking. And when we spoke with Roger about this, he said that he would approach this effort without pulling us in. And so, if only he saved us a major undertaking in order to provide the deliverables that you would have expected from us. And so, to some degree, it's the approach that he's taken has been as a result of our challenges.
Thank you. I am comfortable supporting this application contingent on there being a standard relative to a service standard, a consumer service standard relative to what was passed for Southern Vermont CUD. It would make it contingent upon a similar hurdle that you clear. So I just want to put that out there, that's my thinking at this point. Holly, your hand is up.
Yes, Patty. And it's important to me, here we are talking about this in the abstract, and that enforceability piece has to be documented in an agreement with Maple so that it isn't, this is how we operate, but rather this is what we're entitled to. So Steve, I urge you to have that is, you guys have this great problem. You're working wonderfully together. And so I just don't know what happens in the next 100 years when we don't have somebody as fabulous as Roger and his colleagues at WCBT. God forbid they ever sell that place. So the fact of the matter is that I think it would behoove the public on the expenditure of these public funds to have that in writing, that enforceability provision.
Agreed. Dan and Brian, either of you, do you have comments, questions?
I don't have any comments. I think the conversation is consistent with what we've had in the past.
Sure.
I'm in full agreement with the discussion. Having the enforceability, having the agreement in place.
Yeah, Brian stepped out for a meeting, but he did text that he was in support. He supported the grant proposal.
All right, I'm going to make a motion that we approve a grant award to Waitsfield Champlain Valley Telecom in the amount of $9,104,486, contingent on, I'm not going to micromanage this, I'm going to make it general, but contingent on an agreement between WCVT and Maple to CUD on a consumer protection provisions similar, at least minimally reaching what was approved in the Southern Vermont grant application that was awarded 2 weeks ago.
Would you amend that to be produced in writing to VCBB?
Yes.
Okay, I'll
Yes.
second it.
And subject to staff review?
Yes, both of those amendments. It doesn't need to come before the board, it needs to go in front of staff.
I'll second it.
Excellent. Any more discussion?
Could I ask my colleagues, are we comfortable with the fact that the stated service rate is $103? I guess you are.
And that, but Holly, that's for 100 squared, 100 up, 100
Yeah,
down.
but we don't have a statement of a different rate on the books here.
Hmm. And Roger, can you jump in here and give us some flavor of the expectation of pricing, not necessarily numbers, but an expectation for lower fees?
I've completely lost. I'm trying to read what's coming through on the closed captioning here. That is our 100 over 100 rate. We do have a lesser rate for our 25 over 3, and the vast majority of customers do not subscribe to the 100 over 100. It's one of those ones where people do upgrade to it, but the vast majority of our customers come in at the lowest level offered, and that's something we've often found with fiber. As people go from copper to fiber, the performance over the fiber is so much better than what they've received over copper. They just come in and buy the lowest level possible.
Can you state that rate for us for 25.3?
I'm looking it up now because I don't know it off the top of my head. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, take your time, because I just think it's important in this process that we have at least put on the record that there was a rate available that was something less than $100 a month.
Patty, can I ask a question while Roger's looking that up?
Absolutely.
Steve, does the CUD have any engagement as part of your agreements with Waitsfield Champlain on rate increases in these addresses? So do you have any expectation of being notified? Any kind of materials presented to you? Dates?
No.
Okay, well, I actually think that would be important.
Roger, were you able to find the rate? Let me see, Roger is still looking.
And this, Christine, this came from the staff summary of this proposal. So, you know, it's possible that someone who reviewed this application has that number for us.
Yeah, I can say off the top of my head, it was $79.95, but I'm just looking it up now.
That is correct, Christine. Our 25 over 25 is $79.95. 10 over 10 is $72.95.
Okay, great. Okay, there is a motion on the floor. It's been seconded. Is there any further discussion?
Yes, actually, the notion of having some sort of notice given to the CUDs around price increases. Can I pause for a moment here and ask staff? I just want to assure myself that I don't actually have the grant or the agreement between Maple and Waitsfield Champlain in the share drive available to me. I just want to assure myself that that is the case.
Alyssa.
I believe it's in Maple Broadband's original application. It was shared back when Maple Broadband
And so,
applied.
And so that agreement, all of that agreement is in force for this application as well?
Yeah, we discussed this as staff prior to this meeting, that the original universal service plan was approved by the board under that original application. So that's,
Okay.
what your request, what your question
So then
was.
Steve,
Yeah.
in that application, in that agreement that you have in the original application with Waitsfield Champlain, there's nothing in there. I'm sorry, I'm not pulling it up on the spot here. There's nothing in there about notification to you about rates?
If the question is about what can be found in the network management agreement, there is no notification language of any sort in the network management agreement about notification regarding rate increases or rate changes.
And
Okay,
can,
so
and
let me
Laura,
just
can I interject into your question here a little bit?
Sure.
I'm sorry.
That's all right.
And Steve, just an adjunct to that question. And so whether you're a Maple customer or a WCVT customer, Maple Broadband does not approve rate changes. WCVT sets rates.
Right, as it relates to broadband service.
Yeah, and my question is not about approving. It's about notice and
Right.
timing of notice.
Yep.
And can we have Roger just chime in here? Is everybody correct? You are not obligated to provide any notice of rate increases in the Maple broadband area?
So this will be, it will be our whole Waitsfield and Champlain Valley Telecom operating area, which includes Maple Broadband. And we always provide customer notices of any rates, changes, increases, changes in terms and conditions, or whatever it may be. I mean, it's the customers buying service from us, so they need to be informed of any changes that are coming about. And in terms of that, if we're going in to change rates, I'll be talking to Steve and letting him know this is what we're going to be doing in the area, because at any point in time, Ellie or others could be getting a call from their board members, so they need to be aware of everything that we're doing within the Maple broadband area and well aware of it, so they don't get caught off guard.
Yeah.
Yep.
So are you all amenable to adding language that you will provide something in writing about notification requirements? I mean, 30 days, 15 days, 60 days, whatever it might be. I mean, Roger and Steve, as horrible as it is, you guys are not going to be around forever. So something in writing is probably better.
And that's really something we should take a look at, what the current standards are today for voice in the state, because whether it's Maple Broadband, whether it's NEK, whether it's Southern Vermont, customers need to be notified of the services they're purchasing and of any changes in services. So I mean, it's just really, for us, it's a part of doing business. But I think it's an expectation that really should be for any provider that's out there providing service.
So Roger, you're saying you would commit to doing that as part of this grant?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
So are we adding that in, Patty, to the agreement?
Yes, that's part of the contingency. Let's add that in and be specific. I don't want to leave it out floating in the air. It's part of the contingency for the approval of 9 million plus.
Can we just get the read back on what we're approving from staff?
Yes, you're approving a $9,104,486 grant with 2 contingencies. The one contingency is that Maple Broadband and WCVT come to an agreement that at least meets terms of the Southern Vermont accountability standards, and with a statement and agreement around advanced notification of rate changes.
Great, thank you.
That was accountability and enforcement provisions.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, Steve?
So what I heard Christine say was that WCBT has to at least hit the same high level defined under the Southern Vermont agreement. But in our discussions, it sounded like they could do far less than that and still be okay. But you're expecting that it has to meet or exceed those defined standards?
Yes. Is that amenable, Steve?
If it's amenable to Roger, it's amenable to me.
Subject to staff review.
Roger, is that clear?
And we'll report back to the board.
Okay.
Roger,
You'll-
Roger, you're
Roger,
muted.
you're on mute.
I am amenable to it. There may be some discussions with staff though, to where we may need to make some tweaks to it because of some operating differences between a company Waitsfield size and a company CCI size. But I think we can work through those to the satisfaction of Waitsfield and Maple Broadband and the VCBB.
Okay,
Yeah.
with those
I can add
contingencies
to that.
and
I
that
do
motion
understand
in
that something-
place,
Yeah.
I'm going to call for a vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries. Congratulations, folks.
Patty,
Steve
could I just do a follow-up on that, please?
Sure.
I want to make sure that we're in compliance with your expectations. It sounds like the way Roger spoke that that there is perhaps a first step would be involve WCBT engaging in discussions with staff, VCBB staff, regarding adjustments that might be made to the Southern Vermont requirements, and then followed by agreement on the part of staff that the adjustments that have been made are satisfactory. At that point, then Roger would engage Maple Broadband in making revisions to the network management agreement. Does that sound about right?
I think you can very much approach it in that spirit.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Okay. Next on our agenda is a brief executive session. And for this, Rob sent out a separate link for executive session. This will be VCB board members only, no staff. And I'm anticipating.
Yeah, can I ask how much time you're going to need for that?
Yep, I'm anticipating 15 to 20 minutes.
15 to 20, perfect.
And we should be still on schedule for NTIA middle mile application at 1:45.
Okay,
Stan,
and
Yeah.
does that meet the requirements to go into executive session?
This is Stan. Yeah, I just wanted to ask that you read into the minutes while you're going into executive session, the statutory language of 313A1.
Okay, I'm going to make a motion that we go into executive session. Looking for language here. It's premature in general. It's not premature. It's for a personnel matter.
Okay.
So what language? VSA. It's one VSA section 13, 313. There's something else in there for personnel. It's not A1. Do you know what it is, Stan?
I'm looking it up right now. Yeah.
If you can find that relevant section, we'll put the minutes together with that reference. But it is 1 VSA section 313, and then subparagraphs, it's like B something, but we'll come back to
313A3. A3.
Okay. All right, we will be back online to the regular session once we're concluded by 1:45.
This is Rob. You shouldn't have any trouble, but if you do, let me know. Obviously, I'm not joining the session, but I created the meeting. It shouldn't cause any problems, but I don't have any faith in Teams these days.
Okay, and so Rob, you will let people in?
I have it set that everybody will automatically be let in.
Okay, excellent.
So
Thank
you should be all set. We'll just hang out here.
All right, be back in about 15, 20 minutes.
Okay,
Thank you for
Alyssa,
your time today.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thanks,
Yeah,
Roger.
thanks, Roger.
Okay, Alyssa, you can stop the recording for now.
I'm sorry,
Please.
where is the link for this?
It's in your email. And
It was
there's
sent this morning.
in mine, there's a reminder too.
Started.
No idea which one is the correct one. these
Yeah,
days.
we'll talk about this after. I'm sure that
Yeah.
I've got some ideas. I just
Very
don't talk about
difficult
public.
coming in and
Yeah.
out. And, you know, one thing, before we get into the next item, somebody said that Teams does have breakout rooms so that we can clean this up and not have to exit, come back in, shut down computers and all that stuff. I would ask that staff look into the ability to do that.
We have, and it requires having the executive sessions at a specific time, which means we can't shift our agenda at all.
You know what? Let's not problem solve this
So,
here.
yeah.
I have some
Exactly.
ideas too.
I
Yeah.
put it on your agenda for something to look into improvement on this. This is
Yep.
definitely,
It's our job to fix this. We will
Thank you.
take care of it.
all right. So next item up on our agenda is the overbuild hearing and discussion. Presentation and public comment. Christine, do you want to tee us up?
Yeah, I'm actually going to turn this right over to Stan. He's prepared to lead this. Go ahead, Stan.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, we've circulated a draft policy. It's about a 3-page document. And I received comments from 5 commenters last week. I'm just going to briefly give an overview of the draft and give you a flavor of what the comments were like, and then maybe we can open it up to comments from the board or from the public. As you know, the board's been tasked with universal service in Vermont. That's what Act 71, I would say the main purpose of Act 71 was. Served is defined in Act 71 as at least 25.3. And identifying who is served begins with the interactive broadband map that is maintained by the Department of Public Service. It updates the map annually using information that's voluntarily provided by ISPs, and we make a single adjustment to it to align our data with the definition that requires a wired connection of at least 25.3 to be served. In order to achieve universal service, the legislature was aware that some overbuild would be necessary and addressed it in Act 71. Between the date when the PSD publishes its data and the issuance of a grant, there may be additional construction by providers. And Act 71 specifically requires the board to distinguish these new builds and probable extensions or upgrades that aren't reflected on the map. That's 8086F, which we've discussed in previous meetings. For the VCBB to consider as served any addresses that don't appear to be served on the map, will require a provider to submit a statement that a wireline service at the specific speed is available to specific addresses. And we will consider this data as part of our analysis under 8086F. Regarding probable extensions and upgrades, we're asking providers to submit a signed statement identifying the addresses served, the specific speed, and the completion date. We want to make sure that these probable builds are going to be done on time, and so we're going to give weight to the provider's track record and of providing service in a timely manner, and the location in the pipeline to consider the likelihood of determination. Just reiterate the 3-prong test of 8086F, that the project be a cost-effective method for getting 100 speeds to unserved and underserved locations. that any overbuild is incidental to the objectives of the Universal Service Plan, and that the board make a reasonable effort to distinguish served and unserved or underserved locations within the area, including recognition and consideration of known or probable service extensions or upgrades. In the memo, I talked about, what is cost effective. We want to consider what's cost effective to both consumers and in keeping in mind the goal of universal service to the entire district. The overall objectives would include the business factors of providing universal service to the district, including a workable business plan, the ability to reach all addresses, and the need to build a network with resiliency, redundancy, and excess capacity. In considering whether to give a grant to a provider, the board is tasked with distinguished served and unserved, including known or probable bills. This is, a snapshot in time. The board can't know, every second of, every day what is being built and what isn't. So we have to look, the board has to look when they are considering the grant applications. But once the grant has been awarded, the VCBB may become aware of known or probable service extensions or upgrades. Given the goal to provide universal service to everyone, we don't view such proposed extensions or upgrades as necessarily unwelcome. That's part of competition. Given that providers who've successfully obtained grants must develop their detailed designs and their plans, we don't believe that the existence of additional known or proposed extensions or upgrades should necessarily upend the grantee's build plans. On the other hand, it would make sense from a business standpoint for the grantees to consider the extensions or upgrades and their likely effects on a grantee's plans. That's why we have the method by which the VCBB can acknowledge known or probable builds. In sending out the draft, a lot of comments addressed incidental overbuild, which is the last few paragraphs of what the draft was. I think that this is a separate issue, and I really think that we want to focus on the subsequent build policy. So I propose that the last two paragraphs regarding incidental overbuild not be included in any final policy that we that wraps up the summary. I think that I'm happy to take comments from the board, and then we can discuss how we want to handle comments from the public as well.
Thank you, Stan. I'm going to jump in. I see Holly's hand is up and Laura's hand. I'm going to jump in first, though. New England Cable Telecom Association responded with comments, and they raised two things, stating the 20% number that we put into our draft they thought was too high. Mm-hmm. And they also talked about a challenge process. Can you address both?
We believe the 20% general number is consistent with other states' policies, as well as the FCC has used 20% in some of its rules. This was approved as part of the request for proposals that we put out regarding the construction grant program, and it has been used in analyzing each of the grantees' proposals. There was another part of your question, yeah. And I'm sorry, I forgot.
The other part, Stan, was they raised the challenge process as a requirement in the BEAD, and I don't know anything about that.
There is a challenge process to be able to challenge the FCC maps and I'm not sure that must be what they're talking about, but that has nothing to do with the state maps.
Basically, my takeaway was that they're asking us to establish a formal challenge process. And that allows for anything that they have built to be, basically the data gets refreshed via this challenge process. If we don't refresh the data, they'll refresh it for us, basically. And they're raising it as it's part, that's a requirement of some other grants. And I just want to highlight that, because if that's true, and I don't know that it is or not, but that's something that we need to pay attention to.
That's not something I'm aware of. And at this point, the VCBB does not control the maps. The Department of Public Service has a staff of people who update maps, and they update them once a year. So
Yeah, and if I can weigh in too, that Rob and I just met on this with the department. You know, that's, you know, I think we as a board and the PSD, as you remember early on, we established this process for updating the maps. They're going to have an update available at the end of October. The challenge process that we're aware of is with the FCC challenge, and as Stan said, it's not related to this. We do not have plans to implement a formal challenge process, because that challenge actually goes to the department, not to the VCBB. So the VCBB, what the department, as we were told this morning, welcomes information from telecom providers to be sent to them, and the PSD, Public Service Department, will consider the information that's provided. So all that is already a process that's in place.
I just want to jump in to clarify things. Like, we're talking about the funding we have available now. That's the ARPA funding. We have to evaluate when the BEAD funding comes if there's going to be other processes, but that's not what we're worried about today. The focus today is on addresses that are built, that were built after the PSD maps came out. So we're trying to balance the need for the eligible providers, especially the CUDs, and having some certainty when they're doing their business planning, with the needs to give consideration to builds that happen afterwards. So I think we're just try to do a little bit of clarification there.
All right, just given that there are many government grant applications, it's one of those, I don't want to have us driving our train directly across a bridge that we know there's going to be a stop at the other side of it that's going to come. So let's go with our eyes wide open what some of these other requirements are. With all these grant dollars piling in, we've got to be aware of it, so we don't get some roadblock that hits us unexpectedly.
I believe we are fully aware.
Makes sense.
Let's see, I think Laura had her hand up first. Do Laura, then Holly.
Okay, great. Thank you. I want to raise an issue here, and I would like to see this policy adjusted. So, and here's why. I think what we say we're doing really matters, and it matters on what we're focusing on, and it matters to the people that are engaging with this policy, that they understand what we're doing. And so the very first paragraph here, we talk about the goal that Act 71 noted the goal of achieving universal access to reliable, high quality, affordable fixed broadband in its statement of purpose. In 8081, it also noted that they were establishing the Vermont Community Broadband Board to coordinate, facilitate, support, and accelerate the development and implementation of universal community broadband solutions. And this is a VCBB policy, which means it should be focused on and inclusive of community broadband solutions. And it may seem picky-uni, but I get very concerned, and I see it from time to time, that we think our goal is to get every single Vermonter hooked up. That is not That's not our job. Our job is to support the CUDs in getting that done. And community, the word community, Stan, in this memo, the word community appears in the title only. Only.
I hear your point, but I think this policy is designed to help CUDs.
I don't disagree, but it's not noted in there. And so when I see our private sector friends, you know, Comcast and ECTA with their unsurprising comments about, you know, just don't overbuild us. And if you are, you know, let us know where, but we're not going to tell you anything. I mean, I've heard that, you know, for years.
Sure.
You know, I think that it should be clear that we have an additional goal. We have a goal here that is not just get to everyone. It is to support community broadband efforts, of which they can be a part. No private provider is excluded from participating in that. They may be opting to not be included in that because they've opted to not work with communities. And that is a real distinction. And so, you know, that's a choice that they may be making. And so.
Yeah, point taken, and I can certainly add some language that reflects the community-based approach.
I just feel that I appreciate that, Stan, and you know, to the rest of my colleagues, I feel that it's really important that we don't lose sight and that we are clear about what we are doing and for whom.
Good point, Laura. All right, Holly?
Okay, Stan, I'm your worst nightmare. I didn't come back
Not true.
I didn't come back to functional reality until yesterday. And so I have 12 comments on this document that are required for clarity, including who the heck is a provider in this statement. And so I would really like to submit to you, rather than drag the board through those comments, am I getting back feedback? Are you guys hearing feedback? Somebody must not be muted. Okay. I'm not inclined to drag everybody through all of those because some of them are form over substance type comments, but I find this memo completely circular. Like, we tell you this in this paragraph, see that in the lower paragraph, and in the lower paragraph, it says see that in the upper paragraph. I find it not clear. And so that is something I'd like to help sort. It's also fundamental, and this is the marvelous effect of Representative Sibilia and I sitting on the same board. I see this as stating inadvertently that we're in favor of competition. And I would like to remove that presumption from this document because we have not discussed that as a board. We don't have a policy in favor of competition. And in fact, I think if pressed, we would all agree that some areas of the state might withstand competition, and other areas in this rurally, you know, we are funding rural networks. Some areas can't withstand competition. And I think that's the fundamental truth of why we're supposed to be anticipating overbuild issues. And last but not least, there is no methodology here by which a provider is giving us information. So there has to be notice, there has to be a request for response, and we can't just ignore our obligation under the statute here. We have to act on it. And where we know there's a build, we have to do something about including that in the overbuild. Finally, I'd love to know 20% of what. That's me.
20% of addresses.
Or funding. In one place in this document, it refers to 20% of the funding, encouraging CUDs not to spend more than 20% of the funding on overbuild. So we do need to be clear about how we're counting.
Yeah, and remember, we're taking inputs now as staff from the board. So Holly, appreciate your inputs, would appreciate you in writing, and we'll address
Yeah,
those. So
and I think
we're in
that's-
listening mode. Yeah.
I'm really loving that we're gonna do, I think it's awesome that we heard from some of our commercial carrier friends. That is so helpful. And any CUDs who want to weigh in. And I really appreciate staff understanding that this is really complex, and taking information in and then coming to a votable policy is a great idea.
Very well said. Thank you for that.
Yeah,
Laura, you got another question? Okay.
Yeah, so we did say we were going to allow some public input on this on the agenda. So.
Okay. Do you want to do that now?
Yeah, we wanted to separate that from the general public. Specifically, this is only limited to comments related to the overbuild policy that have not been discussed so far.
All right. Do you want to tee that? You and Rob tee that up?
Sure. Does anybody have any comments that they would like to make that have not been expressed? We've got Rob. I'll let you, why don't you take the moderation of this?
Sure. We had two comments appear at the same time. I think for first person, we'll have Dan Glenville. If you could please put yourself on video, unmute yourself, and then I will add a spotlight, and please identify who you're representing when you are discussing. Thank you for joining us. And we're trying to keep it generally short. You know how it goes.
Good afternoon. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity. I'd just like to restate really that the comments reflected in our September 14th, 2022 filing do outline the specifics of our position with regard to this matter. It did identify some 637 locations that will be serviceable as a result of our builds in recent months. And it did reflect that this information was provided in greater detail on a July 1st, 2022 letter that was sent into the board as well. Happy to take any questions, but we do feel that the commentary outlined in that letter and the detail from our July 1st letter have the necessary detail to provide the board with all of the information. If you have further follow-ups pertaining to any of it, we're happy to address it, but thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Next up, we have Rob Vitsky. I'm sorry if I'm saying your name wrong, from Vacuda, and this is your introduction, I guess, to the board as well.
Yeah, thank you, and appreciate that. So I'm Rob Vitsky. I am serving in a part-time role supporting Vacuda, which I'm sure you know, but for the minutes is the Vermont Communication Union District Association. Tomorrow's my 1 month mark. And so you had a meeting where this policy was on the agenda, and the next day we started a subcommittee at our Vacuda meeting to start discussing this. And it's been a very robust conversation on a number of the topics that you've already spoken of, and that are in there you see in our comments, in the draft comments that we sent back to the staff. I would just say as a start, we think it's a good start. And most of our comments were offered to strengthen it and add some clarity. And by the way, Ellie is chairing the subcommittee with me, so she may want to add a comment or two as well. But we've gone through and had 3 meetings with the subcommittee. We've had a number of one-on-one conversations across various CUD leaders, and discussed this with the full Vacuda board at our meeting 2 weeks ago. And we'll do so again tomorrow. First of all, just to recognize, we thought this was a great start, and we liked the spirit and tone of it. I agree with the comment about the community aspect. We actually thought it reflected that, and so adding some words to that effect would be great, but we read it very positively as a first pass. We did think that the overall broad intent of Act 71 could come through more clearly, and some of the trade-offs that you all have to manage in terms of really focusing on making sure that the services we provide to unserved and underserved or sustainable well beyond the build period. And the economics of that and what that means is very important. And in some cases, that means that as the build plans are approved, if someone declares that they plan to build in that territory, removing that territory from the CUD's area, even if that would mean those two were in competition, could be problematic to the business model. And so it's important to carefully look at the impact of those declarations by folks coming into those communities that weren't there before. We thought there were some ways to clarify the information you gather. There's stories around the country right now about providers lashing up fiber so that they can include it in their mapping submission, but not having the plans behind it to actually build out or add splitters or drops to those lines. And so we added a concept into our draft comments that, of course, submitting to the mapping process is something that a provider can do. But if they really wanted to provide some surety that they were going to do it, they could also provide a performance bond for the project, either to the VCBB or to the towns that they're going to be servicing. That's a very well-known private sector way to say you're serious about something and there's a penalty if you don't do it. I think, we also talked in our comments a little bit about service prices and installation prices, and just once those builds are done, are they going to be in line with what the provider is doing in other service areas? And again, these are all just general ways of, as you guys consider the information before you in the subsequent build announcements, that you have real clarity of the quality of information you're looking at and what it really means. So I think that's probably it for us. Thank you for your collaboration. Again, I'm just delighted to be here. The mission and the quality of the discussions among these CUD leaders is awesome. And it's a pleasure to be a part of it. And I look forward to working with you in the future years.
Thank you, Rob. Any other people here for comments? If you're on the phone, you can also jump in right now, because I know you can't raise your hand on the phone. So you can unmute yourself and jump in. We have a few phone numbers listed on here. Going once. No other public, Clay.
Yeah.
Hello, Clay.
Hey, hello, thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Richards. I just wanted to join. I had a discussion this morning with the executive director and staff on the broadband mapping kind of sub issue that I think is embedded in this policy that the board is putting together. And when it comes to subsequent builds, I think it's a kind of a bit of a delicate issue for us to address on an ongoing basis, as in making our maps iterative, having a 3-month or a 6-month or a 9-month update to our annual mapping, because the process really is quite involved. We get the bulk of our data, we get in April when we receive cable annual reports. And we use that data. Then we ask other providers to provide us with data. And from about April until now, about mid-September, we kind of take on the role of a dentist who's pulling teeth. And we are pulling the teeth of the providers to get them to give us their data. And sometimes things go smoothly, sometimes it doesn't. And, we don't want to start producing the maps until we have all the data. So I think the hardest part of our staff's job is really just staying on top of providers to get that data. In our last letter that we sent to broadband providers, we included the CUDs and every known broadband provider, non-CUD broadband provider that we know to be in operation in the state. And in that letter, we asked for your annual broadband data as of December 31st, 2021. But we also asked for your broadband data of prospective builds that you plan to build in calendar year 22. So this was an opportunity for providers to say, hey, we are working on this project. And we did get one letter from Comcast specifically outlining the same letter you received outlining project build. But in many cases, we didn't get anything back on that. It became clear to us that, you know, a lot of providers are uncomfortable about sharing kind of prospective broadband data, whatever reason it is that competitively sensitive, or they're worried about the promise that they're making if they can't follow through on it. Who knows what the reason is, but that was an unwelcome request by the department. You know, we tried on that front, but I do think it's going to be very hard for the department to come up with iterations of our map throughout the year. We're happy to do it if that would be something that's beneficial to this board, but I would just warn that I don't think we're going to get a whole lot of good participation. And I think when you get a letter from a carrier, you know, 600 addresses here or 300 addresses there, that regardless of whether it's included in our maps or not, I do you know, have a concern that we're on notice that those sites are proposed to be built. Once they are built, I do think they become ineligible if they meet the eligibility criteria for either the BEAD program or for under the state construction grant statute. But until they're built, you know, they're simply proposed to be built. So I think that, you know, that's our position. We want to be helpful to this board. If you think that there's a role for us to play in doing iterations of the map, I think we can continue to have those discussions with the board staff. But as of now, we're really just focused on our annual updates simply because, you know, that's what we could get. Thank you.
I think it's important for the record to reflect that that was Clay Purvis of the Vermont Department of Public Service. Clay, I believe your title is Director of Telecommunications.
Yes, thank you. Did I not introduce myself?
Well, we all kind of know you.
Okay, that's true. This is a veritable who's who of broadband in Vermont. I'm impressed with the guest list here. But yes, I'm Clay Purvis with the Department of Public Service. Thank you.
Thank you, Clay.
Okay, we got Rick Rothenberg next. Oh, Rick, your hand keeps going up and down. I'm not sure whether you.
Rick, we just lost you. Raise your hand again. Okay, there you are, Rick.
Yeah,
okay, I'm gonna stop spotlighting Clay and spotlight you.
Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Rick Rothenberg. I'm the president of Stowe Cable Systems. We just want to go on the record as opposing the 20% overbill funding. And I think Holly presented a good point that, you know, some of these areas that are low density, which we're in the process of building now, you know, if there's competition in these areas, we're going to find that it's very difficult to build them. When you have 2 or 3 homes in a mile, it's a very difficult process. So, you know, you're going to find that it's going to harm the service availability rather than help it. And we just want to go on the record that we're opposing that. We're doing everything we can to cover these last mile folks, and we've done a pretty good job of that at this point. And you know, we're not one of the larger providers. We're a small independent. So the territory that we cover is all we have, and we work very hard to make sure that all those folks are covered with services that exceed the 100 all the way up to a gig process on fiber. And we're working to convert all the coaxial HFC plant to fiber as well.
Do we have anybody? Thank you, Rick.
Thank you.
Do we have anybody else? Going once, I know we have other providers on the line here. I perfectly understand why you're just listening, but if you want to say anything, this is your opportunity. Okay. I don't see any other hands, Patty.
Okay, we can always come back in public comment at around 3:45. We'll take another round of public comment if anybody does have any burning issues that they want to speak to us about. Okay, with that, we will move along to item 6 on our agenda, legislation and policy proposals. Christine, do you want to tee us up?
Yeah, this is really for the board to provide input. You know, we are, the administration has asked us to, you know, provide them with where we're going in a policy in terms of legislation policies. And it's a good time to tee this up as a discussion for the next session. One of the issues that we've talked about with the board, we certainly talked about in our weekly updates, is the multi-dwelling units, these exclusive contracts. But a multi-dwelling unit issue that we face is that many of this housing, multi-dwelling housing, and even low-income housing that's held by private providers, will make a exclusive contract with a telecom provider, and get a significantly discounted or rate for themselves, or even kickbacks, and that creates a problem from a standpoint of universal service and getting fiber into these institutions. This is a national problem. We've reached out to the state broadband leaders and the NTIA to ask for direction on this. They've said the best way to solve this is at the state level. There are a number of states, Illinois and Indiana, have passed legislation. So we have some legislation we can work from. Connecticut is in the process of passing legislation. So this is something that staff would be recommended. We would come back with some language to the board as a recommended piece of legislation, and it'll be modeled after some of the other states that have been successful working this issue. So that's one issue. We also want to consider we don't have a position on this yet, but we want to consider the fact that the BEAD is looking at 100/20 as a served versus the 25/3 that's in the legislation. So, certainly that's something we want to discuss moving forward. Did I miss anything, Stan or Rob?
I think we're mostly keeping it at a high level right now, and we want to have input from the board on the ideas from the board.
All right, Laura has her hand up. Laura?
Yeah, question. In your discussions with the administration so far, any discussion about VUSF? So those funds were in the creation of Act 71 were considered to be pretty critical and well matched towards maintaining staffing at the VCBB, because they'll taper as the job is getting done. They should be tapering off. So have you heard any discussions in that regard?
Yeah, I'll actually skip to a staff update too, because let me just talk briefly about the budget process, because it will be embedded in that budget discussion. We are working closely with the administration by October 11th to come up with a 2-year budget. I let the administration know that, essentially as soon as it gets that printed, it's not going to be valid, because ultimately, it's as valid as we can be, right, with knowing what we have. But I said ultimately the board has approval. You as a board have the ultimate approval of this budget. So we're cooperating with the state budget process, and we're going to line up our budget reporting. We haven't done budget reporting because of the complications between state, but we've got some assurances. I got some assurances out of this process that we will get what we're looking for in terms of obligated funds, rather than just waiting until it gets reported. So that's a kind of a long-winded answer, but the reason that answer is embedded in there is because the USF funding, what we learned was we thought we had $1.5 million allocated separately for our administration costs. But it turns out that is not a separate fund. That is not a separate allocation from the general fund. That's considered taken out of our grant allocations. So with that, the USF becomes critically important because we are going to fund staff through the USF so we can have as much money going to infrastructure as possible. So we will be going into this legislative session. The administration's not pushed back on this, but they said we can expect a fight when we get to the legislature on the USF funds. But those are going to be really important in order to maintain the grant funding for the infrastructure.
Yeah, Patty, I would suggest, to the extent that the board the board gets some sort of summary briefing update on USF, because I do expect that USF will once again be in play. There's big challenges with 911 board, public safety generally, getting that funded, and it's oversubscribed. There's not enough money for the E911 board. And so I think it would be important for this board to understand how that funding is here, and maybe make a formal statement, or be ready to make a formal statement in that regard.
Okay, that's helpful, Laura. I mean, this sounds like a really big issue, Christine. If we don't have those funds, then what?
Well, that is reduced funding for infrastructure.
So then the staffing that we have for VCBB would have to be paid from
the
our ARPA dollars, which is less money going to the CUDs.
Correct.
Okay, all right. Okay. One other thing in the legislative piece that I'd like you to expand on, if we move legislatively from 25.3 as the definition of underserved to 120, are we not going to pick up a whole giant increase in numbers of people that are considered underserved?
Yes, that will increase the number of people who are underserved. That's what the FCC definition has moved towards.
I mean, the risk of doing that is our CUDs would not be able to build out and cover everybody that's considered underserved, because the threshold, the barrier just went from here to way up. I think that's a real problem.
Yeah, well, that's the point. Is we haven't, the staff hasn't taken a position on this yet. We have to evaluate it more. I'm letting you know that we're considering looking at this and bringing that back to the board. Go ahead, Rob.
Yeah, I want to say that most cable in the state is considered is over 100 by a 20. There's some that is not. Wireless locations we're not counting already, since we're not considering them reliable. We're using the original ARPA definition. They're already included in our mix. It's the amount of change is not going to be massive.
Right. It says 25.3 is cable. It's not DSL. It's not, it's, and so the 120, the thing I worry about, well, I can tell you at least one legislator who would probably not be in favor of going to 120 if we were going to shift it, that would be looking for us to go to 100. So.
Okay.
As served.
Okay, so Christine, you're asking us then to get our thoughts together relative to legislative changes? Okay.
Yeah, and we'll be bringing further proposals in, but Holly has her hand up too. So.
Oh, sorry, Holly.
So this is just in the nature of or in the water. And so I have no cogent thoughts on this. I just have random thoughts. And that's to put on the map, is it time to start thinking about the use of funding for subsidies, state subsidies for service? And this is where I'm going with this. I know it's a challenge, but all of our rates in our rural areas are coming in around 75 to 80 bucks for basic service. Most low-income households can qualify for an ACP, which gives them, well, if they get Lifeline too, they can get up to $39. So that's approximately $35, $40 difference. They can sometimes subsidize and pay for their own cable rates. The estimate is up to $20, $22, that still leaves a gap of $10 to $15. And I don't know that now is the time, because I know we're not ready to redirect funding from construction to service. And I don't have a plan for you about how this stops becoming a need. But as a placeholder, we just need to think about affordability and how we're going to get affordability on the map. And I know this is a challenge, but I'm just putting a placeholder here. Because even with these subsidized systems, we don't have what low income households, and that's a term of art that's qualified in the ACP federal subsidy program. We don't have rates that would be deemed affordable in that environment, even though we're subsidizing them.
Yeah, Patty, by the way, there was a new agenda that went out. We need to, we had a priority for NEK broadband on what that's, you got that in your email.
I'm sorry, say that again?
We sent a new agenda out on Friday. Rob, maybe you could send that out again.
Yeah, the one I have doesn't have NEK on it.
Yeah, there's on the website and sent out, there was an updated agenda that has that. Also, if you look on your calendar link in Outlook for the meeting invite, that also always has the updated agenda. The only thing that matters right now is we just have to include NEK. That's all for.
All right. So we've got remaining staff update, the CUDA update, public comment, and now we have a new item that I don't have on this agenda, NEK. How are we going to fit this all in?
Well, I think we don't need to do staff updates as far as I'm concerned, because I hit the budget stuff, and we provide everything in the weekly, so I think that's optional. So you can kick that off of there.
Great. Do you want to move next to NEK?
Thanks, Rob.
Yes. Okay. Krista, do you want to state your request to the board here?
Yeah, I'm just going to let you know the agenda that I have does not have NEK on it, and I don't have anything in terms of background materials. I'm not sure if others have it or not, so definitely please summarize.
Yeah, there was no background material.
Okay, so what I sent out didn't go out this morning. I just wanted that. Okay, that's fine. So NEK Broadband applied for a $21.5 million Reconnect Round 3 grant. We were denied for that grant, and I've spent a lot of hours in the last week and a half on the phone with different folks from Reconnect, understanding their comments on the application. And I'm interested, so Reconnect 4, which has more funding in it and has some different types of grant categories in it. Reconnect 4 opened on September 4th and it closes on November 4th. And so it's a very tight timeline. So what I'm interested in discussing with the board are some items related to that Reconnect grant application that involve confidential negotiations with other parties and involve the ways in, well, that's the primary one, but they also involve the ways in which we attain the grant funding that's been allocated to us. And so those are the two issues that I'm looking to speak with the board about. The timing is important because the decisions or comments of the board will impact our proposed funded service area. And it's a big lift to put that proposed funded service area together, and then to put together the entire, the design and all of the details that go into the grant. And so I am looking for an executive session in which I can discuss those two items, which are, one, confidential because of contract negotiations, and two, confidential because of the CUD strategy in regards to a grant application.
Go ahead, Holly.
Chris, I just want clarification. You're telling us that you didn't get a grant that was a contingency on your ability to execute on your VCBB grant. Is that right?
So that's not actually what I said, but that's not necessarily not true. So yeah, part of this has to do, so when we put the application in, this was before the construction grant process, right? And we put in, of course, we had a large amount of grant funds in our project. And one of the two reasons that our project was denied had to do with the construction grants in our proposal. And what they've said is a pathway to yes, involves, you know, the commitment of those funds. So that's one piece of it. But there's another piece of it that involves something else that has to do with contract negotiations that I really don't want to talk about in public session. With
I
two
hear you
different,
struggling.
sorry.
All right, any other questions for general session? Otherwise, we'll move into executive session. All right, I'm going to make a motion. Go ahead.
Yeah, let's, Rob, could you give us some real guidance on executive session? So do this smoothly.
You mean Stan?
Well, no, I'm talking about the logistics of going into executive session.
Oh, the logistics, you have a link. It's the same as it always is.
Does it work?
For most of us, I'm not sure.
Yeah,
Is it the
actually,
same link that
would you mind forwarding that to me, Rob? I'm looking for it right now, but I know you sent it to me. I'm find it.
Rob, actually resend it again to everybody so to make sure we've got the latest and greatest.
Sure, I'll adjust the time and that'll reset.
All right, I'm going to make a motion that we move.
I've got it.
I'm going to make a motion. We move to executive session to discuss NEK, grant application as premature general knowledge. Public knowledge would clearly place the public body or person involved at a substantial disadvantage per 1 VSA section 313A1.
I second that.
Any discussion? All right, hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 I just sent the invite again too.
Thank you. Coming into executive session will be VCBB board, VCBB staff, as well as NEK representatives. All right, we'll close here and come into.
We should be back in about 15 minutes.
Successful then.
Exactly. Shut your laptop down. Okay. So we ready to go?
Yep, I've restarted recording.
All right. So let's move on to our 1:45 time slot, which is NTIA middle mile application. Christine, do you want to kick us off?
Yep, and I assume just for the record that no action taken. And
exactly. In executive session, there was no action taken.
Okay. Yeah, so the middle mile, we've got CTC here to show the maps, but I'll give you a basic breakdown of what we're doing. And we will have the application ready Wednesday, end of day, to send to the board to see the details. But essentially what we've done, and I know the board's aware of why this middle mile was applied for, in terms of, but I do want to make a point that, we talk about affordability. And I think the most important thing, and we said this from day one, I'll just remind you, our mantra is the more money we can get in grant funding, the lower the price can be for the CUDs to provide service, because their service is all driven by what's called the average revenue per unit. And their debt service cost is a large driver of that average revenue per unit. So we've aggressively gone after a $100 million middle mile grant. And we've found tremendous support from different agencies of the state, recognizing that this is important. This is very important. In fact, I'll quote one person who said, "Hey, if you didn't apply this, it would be negligent. So essentially, we're working with a variety of partners. We've got Consolidated VTEL, Waitsfield, Champlain Valley Telecom, and others have put in their route needs. We're doing really a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to build a highly reliable and redundant statewide network without looking at all the interstate connections as well. And we have, this is a very competitive grant. We're sitting at about a $93 million application right now. And we'll be glad to answer any detailed questions in executive session because we are still in negotiations. And I know I had tried, the goal was to try to get this grant application out by the 15th, but we've been still negotiating with the CUDs. Overall, the CUDs are supportive. We still got some more details to work out. Our goal is to get all that done by Wednesday evening and get the board a detailed, get the copy of the application for you to review. That application needs to be in by the 30th. And also, you should know that the June Tierney also wants to review that application, who's the executive director of the Department of Public Service. And I see Holly has a question. Go ahead, Holly.
Thank you. First of all, why can't June be simultaneously reviewing it like right now?
Well, CTC had asked for a couple more days to just get some final inputs.
Okay.
Into it.
Okay, that's question one. And question two is this. I can't get my brain around why CUDs would have objections, except for the idea that some federal funding would be spent on middle mile that could be used for incumbent carriers. And so this idea that we have to go into executive session to discuss it is fraught for me because this is the most public of applications. So I actually think concerns should be put on the record. And this is a conversation that is exceedingly public because we're talking about how should we approach federal funding of middle mile. So maybe you're just going to tell me about business plan impact that individual ISPs don't want shared, but I just feel we need some clarification about why this is confidential.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's a really excellent question, and I want to be very clear on this. Of what for the public, that any discussions we have in executive session will be solely about the route map and the private telecom carriers. We've signed NDAs with them that we wouldn't, share this publicly. So any specific discussions we do in executive session should be strictly limited to the routes itself, but everything else should be public. And let me just say, also add, Holly, that the CUDs are supportive. It's the same thing. Things are moving fast. Trying to go through every CUD and explain the details is what the challenge is. But overall, we do have, a tentative vote of support from the CUD. Other questions from the board? Public session.
Laura, do you have a question?
No. No.
Right, do we need to move into executive session?
Yeah, that's a good question. Do you want to see the routes?
All right, I'm seeing one head shake, yes.
Yes, please.
So, and I will say this on the public record, there is in Act 71 a requirement that the VCBB, I guess I'm going to say it's a requirement, that we do a state plan. Does this help us consolidate that effort of a state? Laura, you're shaking your head.
Well, I'm going to say yes. This is absolutely a statewide design, as
a
competing
statewide
for-
design. Yeah.
Right, yep.
Yeah. And so this is leveraging federal funding to come up with that statewide design, but all of the carriers, whether they are CUDs or incumbent carriers, have had some voice in how this design would look in the end.
I would not say all of the carriers have, however, we have the routes that will meet all of their needs. We haven't involved all the carriers because that would be very cumbersome.
Yeah, and so I would just like to be clear that this is not required as part of Act 71. This is allowed as part of Act 71. Which is a pretty big distinction.
Yeah,
Okay?
I'm not
Agreed.
going to comment one way or the
Agreed.
other because I don't want to take our time to pull up the act. But if you're saying that we're authorized, I'm cool.
Yeah, I have it up.
Yeah, and it's nobody would disagree that it's pretty important that the VCBB understand the state assets or the resources. Yeah.
Okay, so if there's no further questions in general for the public session, because if we're going to go into executive session, it'll just be for looking at the routes. I want to limit discussion in executive session to just what's necessary for the NDAs.
Patty,
Yes.
may I just read the section? It's brief. So the board shall have the power to, and it's shall have the power to contract for a comprehensive statewide fiber optic engineering design to identify strategies that maximize fiber optic build-out efficiency and ensure resiliency and interoperability of all existing fiber optic network built with public or ratepayer funds, and that takes into consideration all proposed publicly funded fiber optic projects, the development of which shall not be required or impede the disbursement of grants under this chapter. That's the end.
Cool beans.
Well done.
Cool beans.
All right, any other public discussion on the NTIA middle mile grant application? All right, I'm going to put a motion that we move to executive session. It would include board members, staff, CTC, as premature general public knowledge would clearly place the public body or a person involved at a substantial disadvantage, referencing 1 VSA section 313, paragraph A. I think that's F. A1, sorry. It's really small on my thing here. Do I have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Okay, ayes have it. So
Afraid
we'll
to leave
move
this
on to
group.
executive session. I hope.
Oops. Alyssa, please stop the recording. For everybody here, we're going to still aim for 2:15 for the hearing. We may be 5 minutes late or so.
For the hearing.
I've restarted the recording.
Okay, we've got a quorum. We got a quorum, Patty. Oh, you're on mute, Patty.
Let's move to public comment and then we'll follow up with Vakuda.
Okay, what do we have? Anybody want, raise your hand if you want to make a comment.
And for the minutes, we'll just let the record know, exiting the executive session, there was no action taken.
See any hands up? We do have one or two people on the phone. Do any of those folks on the phone want to speak? Going once, going twice. Do we have any public comment? It appears not.
Okay.
So, public comment?
All right, let's move to VCUDA update.
Thank you again, Rob Beatty again for VCUDA. Very quick comments and we'll get you on your way. So the biggest changes at VCUDA this month is one, we have some staff back. So again, I'm very pleased to be here. Obviously still learning and welcome outreach from anyone that would like to talk a little bit about what we're up to. We received another $250,000 worth of fiber and delivered it to the CUDs from our shared cooperative buying program. And most of our activity this month was on the overbuild policy subcommittee. And then finally, I guess the last update is we're going to be discussing I hope, well-received strong letter of support for the middle mile proposal at our meeting tomorrow morning. And hopefully we'll get to that to you very shortly. Of course, there's lots of activity. A lot of folks are transitioning from pre-construction to construction and a lot of activity out in the CUDs, but I'll leave it at that.
Thank you very much. Any questions of the board? And welcome, Rob. It's nice to meet you virtually.
I just want to add that my welcome to yours, Patty. Rob, it's just fabulous to have you in place. Thank you.
All right. Anything else?
Did we confirm the next meeting for 2 weeks from today?
I will get there, Rob. Okay, our next meeting is October 3rd. I just want to take a roll call real quick to make sure everybody can make that date. Is everybody available?
I'm good.
Brian? You're muted.
What was that date, Patty?
October 3rd?
Yeah, that's the same. Yeah, we've had that scheduled, right?
And Holly, how about you?
I'm available. I don't have the invite somehow.
All right, so calendar-wise, we are good to go. So let's make it so. All right. All right, I move that we adjourn. I have a second.
Second and third.
All right, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Meeting adjourned. Thank you all. See you on October 3rd.
Yep. Thank you, buddy.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.